Hi guys, today I wanted to talk all about working remotely, the potential advantages and drawbacks of that. Let's be honest, the shift towards remote work had already begun in earnest, but it's simply the current public health situation which has really brought the conversation forward, accelerated that whole process. So I'm going to be talking about my own personal experiences as a freelancer in this case. Quick disclaimer, if you do hear any sirens, cars honking their horns, any drilling or hammering, then I'm afraid those are all part of the drawbacks of working remotely or recording a YouTube video from home. So normally I would pause, edit those out, maybe start again, but I think it's going to give it a more authentic feel, so I'm going to leave those in. So listen out, eyes down for a siren, a honking, and maybe some drilling and hammering. Maybe if you want to make your own sort of bingo card for that, by all means do so. The first obvious benefit to working remotely is the fact that it's very efficient in terms of time. You don't waste time getting from A to B. I will compare the fact that I did the same job essentially for the same client several months apart. The first was pre-pandemic, the second was post-pandemic. And clearly there was a massive difference in the amount of time it took me to be able to provide that service. Back in February, I had to travel to the other end of the country. That involved taking a plane. I stayed over in a hotel. Then I had to travel to a football training ground the next day, conduct a couple of interviews and come home. The whole process probably took about 24 hours. Compare that then to what I did earlier this week, which was all done on Zoom, 2 interviews once again with 2 footballers. This time around, it probably took 90 minutes to 2 hours tops. So clearly there's a massive difference there in terms of how long it took me and how much more efficient it is to work remotely. That leads me very nicely to the second benefit. There's no getting around it. It also cuts costs, whether it's the employer that's bearing those costs. You would hope so. Maybe they're providing travel and accommodation costs, but they're able to save on all of that. Even if it's you bearing the costs, then naturally that's a very positive knock-on effect for you. There's also another benefit in the fact that if your employer is able to save on travel and accommodation costs, maybe they have greater scope within the budget to be able to do more of this same activity, so you might get more work as a result, or maybe you're even able to negotiate a higher rate because they've got more cash to play with. The advantages of working remotely in this particular instance are all quite closely linked together, and this is rather similar to the initial one that I made, the point about time management and efficiency. Earlier on this week I was very fortunate. I really struck the jackpot from a freelance perspective. I was able to do 4 jobs in 4 different languages for 4 different clients. I was rather fortunate. Dreadful pun. Ignore that. Should probably edit that out if I had more time or desire to do so. But there, naturally, I was helped by the extenuating circumstances, the fact that Italian football unusually is being played throughout June and July, which means we have later kickoffs to allow for the heat in the country. So that means my working day has become a lot longer. I had a kickoff at 9:45 p.m. 2 of those jobs had slightly more flexible deadlines. I was able to send them at any time during that day, so I was able to work my other 2 commitments around that. And naturally, it was a very long day, a very tiring one, but also very rewarding because you're able to work, as I said, for several clients within one day, and that really is the freelance dream. I've already referred to it on a couple of occasions. Naturally, given the current climate, remote work Another benefit, I've already alluded to it on a couple of occasions. In fact, I've referred to it directly. We are still in the midst of a public health situation, and let's be honest, remote working is a lot safer. There's less risk of contamination and contagion. Finally, and this is a benefit which has always appealed to me about being a freelance translator full-time, it's the ability to live anywhere. I'm sure we've all daydreamed and wondered what it would be like to go and live somewhere else in another exotic part of the world, maybe decamp to an exotic island, take your laptop with you, hope you have a strong enough internet connection and do all your work from paradise. Well, remote working does essentially allow for that. Let's move on to the cons then, and we've already heard from one of those. You are at the mercy of external factors. I live in Milan city centre. I do a lot of voiceover work, but my home is not necessarily equipped for voiceover because I'm renting. I can't necessarily renovate certain areas of the house. I can't build myself a soundproof booth, and therefore if someone starts drilling or someone starts honking, then I have to pause and either resume or start the whole process again. It can be very frustrating. The only option there that I can see is potentially brokering a peace deal, in inverted commas, or perhaps even settling on a truce. Please, could you give me a couple of hours of silence away from the drilling so that I can get my job done? But if you're doing a full day's work, then that's just not feasible. So you're at the mercy of external factors. You're also at the mercy of technology because, yes, whilst the internet is great and almost universal, certainly in Western Europe where I'm based, an internet connection can drop at any time and then suddenly you are really struggling. You're up the creek without a paddle. And let's be honest, even if it's no fault of your own, no client or people that you're working with are going to be too sympathetic when you simply say, sorry, my internet's gone, I'm having technical issues. People don't care. They want to know that you're there and you're able to get the job done. A third factor, which I think is quite important, I've noticed this when I've been interpreting remotely in the past, there is a slight difference in terms of focus. You are not quite in the same headspace. When you go and work at a conference and you step into the conference venue and you have your booth there, it's very clearly demarcated psychologically. Okay, now I am stepping in to my workplace. When you're having to interpret maybe from your sitting room or from your kitchen, wherever it is you've set up, then anything can disrupt you. This again comes back a little bit to the external factors that we mentioned previously. I'd even go as far as mentioning some of the BT Sport football commentators that during the lockdown process began working on German football in particular from their homes. The company set them up from a technological perspective to be able to do that, but in one specific instance there was someone knocking at the door trying to deliver supermarket groceries. So these are things that you can't really legislate for, and it's all out of your hands. So that focus can go at any time. Either it's a knock on the door that you haven't planned for, or perhaps you just switch off because you are in your home environment and it's not as clearly defined in your mind, okay, now I'm stepping into the office. A fourth drawback pertains to interpersonal relationships. Naturally, working at home means that you're relying on phone conversations or email. There is no opportunity to build a rapport, to interact with your clients. I noticed that slightly with the interviews I did. There was a clear difference between the rapport I was able to build when I was there in person and the lesser rapport that I was able to really establish with my interviewee when I was doing it remotely over Zoom, and that's understandable. Similarly, when you're working with colleagues, you can be a lot more sympathetic towards their needs and vice versa if you're there in person, and you can gauge a lot more from body language, facial expression, tone of voice. Little factors, little elements such as those that might not necessarily be as visible when you're working remotely from one another. And finally, this is something that's been addressed specifically with regards to conference interpreting, and I'll try and find some material about this because there's been a really good debate about this. The burden has also shifted when it comes to the responsibility, the liability of the interpreter. No longer are we simply required to go into the booth, turn on the mic, interpret and make sure that we are faithful and accurate in our rendering of what the speaker is saying. We also now have the whole technological side to deal with. So we need to make sure that we have a functioning internet connection, that our microphone is good enough, that we're in a place which is acoustically acceptable, and we need to make sure that all of that is shipshape. Otherwise, the event can't take place as planned. So if any of that goes awry, then the liability then shifts onto the interpreter. And this is a significant consideration, I would suggest. So there you have it, 5 benefits and 5 disadvantages of working remotely. Personally, I'm enjoying the process. I love the mix that I have, the bit of variety. Some jobs I'm able to do from home, which is great. Other times I have to travel, and I immensely enjoy that as well. Hopefully that will all resume in earnest once we're able to get a real handle on the current public health situation. I'm so intrigued as to the current dynamic and my mix of remote work and work in person on site that I've even added a tab to my work spreadsheet that I keep just to see what the proportion is there. I think currently it's 60-40 this year in favour of in-person work on site as opposed to the remote side of things. But naturally we did have a 3-month period where none of us could leave the house So that's natural that that's increased the proportion of remote work. I'm interested to see how that dynamic develops. Who knows if it eventually gets to a stage where it's 80% remote, 20% on-site. I might even consider a move myself. Thanks guys, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, thumbs up as usual. Subscribe if you haven't done already. Please comment. I love to read through those. I always reply as well. So if you want to engage in a debate, then please get hold of me. Look forward to hearing from you. Cheers.